Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anika Ashton, and I'm one of the 17th Circuit appointed representatives for the Florida Bar Young Lawyers Division Board of Governors. Welcome to the Florida Bar YLD Health and Wellness Committee webinar series. Before we begin our program today, I'd like to tell you a bit about the YLD and what we do. We work to advocate for, educate, and serve Florida's young lawyers. Some examples of this includes producing all of the basic CLEs that young lawyers are required to take in their first 3 years of practice, including practicing with professionalism. We've created a website, startmyfloridalawfirm.com, to help young lawyers learn the tools they need to successfully start their own law firm. We also created the Florida Bar YLD's Legal Accelerator website. This is a one-stop hub for young lawyers to get answers to many common questions that they'll encounter as they transition to the practice of law. It is easily searchable and organized in a user-friendly manner. We recently launched the Find an Affiliate website, where you can find out about the leadership, initiatives, and fundraising done by your local bar association throughout the state of Florida. And the YLD has also led the way in raising awareness about health and wellness for young lawyers, including working to reduce the stigma addressing mental health issues through programs like the one today. These are only a few things that we do, but the most important thing we do is serve as a voice within the Florida Bar. So make sure to share your questions and ideas with me or your local YLD representative. Learn more about the YLD at FLAYLD.org or follow us on social media at FLABarYLD. Now, we're going to move on to introducing our speaker, Dr. Weinstein. We're lucky today to have him here today, and he'll be presenting our program called Stress, Burnout, HumblePie for CLE credit. Before I turn the program over to Dr. Weinstein, I wanted to properly introduce him. Dr. Weinstein has been the clinical director for the Florida Lawyers Assistance since 2004. He brings over 20 years of experience to FLA. Dr. Weinstein received his PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Miami, a MS in counseling psychology from North Texas State University, and a BA in psychology from the University of Florida. Dr. Weinstein provides psychological oversight, statewide mental health coordination, and clinical services to FLA clients. He has a strong background in clinical psychology and addiction treatment. He's made several presentations and written articles about the psychological challenges facing the legal profession. Dr. Weinstein is a member of the Communications Committee for the National Commission on Lawyers Assistance Programs, Task Force for Lawyer Wellbeing. The Task Force Communication Committee is charged with developing and implementing a national media campaign to reduce stigma, developing and implementing a strategy to reach the younger generation of lawyers, addressing inclusion, diversity, and its implicit bias, and developing recommendations for model rules on lawyer well-being. Dr. Weinstein enjoys plant-based cooking and spending time with his family, and if the doc is around you, you can bet his beloved dog, Maya, is somewhere close by. Without further ado, here's Dr. Weinstein presenting Stress, Burnout, and HumblePie.
Thank you, Anika. I'm looking forward to talking with you all today. And by the way, Maya is with me. She's in the office. If you have any questions for her directly, don't hesitate to ask. She'll be happy to answer anything. She's a certified therapy dog, so on top of being good company, she does real well with all the folks that walk in and out of the office who are dealing with this particular topic of stress and burnout. I'm sure it's not a topic that's unfamiliar to you. The HumblePie piece may throw some of you, but I'll fill in the reason why I put it at the end of the presentation. But as we go along, these are some of the things that I want you all to know that we may be covering and should be. Understanding identifying sources of stress in your life, both inside and outside your job. Learning how to manage it before it leads to what we call burnout, which is no longer wanting to go to your job. Identifying the signs of burnout and stress in your colleagues and others that work with you, because as you know, part of your responsibility as an attorney in Florida is to look out for each other. And one of the things that we'll talk about somewhat is how to gently approach a friend or a colleague or even a supervisor and say, hey, I'm concerned about you. Have you thought about reaching out for some help? And overall satisfaction is a key here, because one of the things that I've learned over my many years of practicing psychology is how to strive for satisfaction in my life. And I'll give you one of my secrets down a little later and how I do that. One of the things we always start with is a simple definition of stress, and there's so many out there, but I think this one kind of really gets to the heart of the issue. It's a series of physiological responses to real or imagined threat or demands. And why we use the real or imagined, because sometimes our jobs do have real pressures and real demands, especially clients who are calling upon us at every hour of the night. And that creates a level of stress that we need to work with and realize. But the imagined stress or the imagined threat is something that we do internally, and we build on the messages that we hear and the expectations that we have upon ourselves. And sometimes we cross the line and blur the boundary between what's real or imagined, and that increases our stress level tremendously. And that's something to be very much aware of. Is it really happening, or is it something that I'm embellishing in my mind? And of course, if we let stress go unchecked and untreated for too long, we wind up experiencing a sense of burnout. Hopefully no one on this webinar is at that point yet. You all are, by definition, young lawyers, and young meaning young in your career. But if you're already experiencing a sense of burnout, that should be a real red flag that you may be needing to look at that right now before it gets too out of control. But when we cross the line from stress to burnout, we're talking about a sense of loss of control over a situation. We're no longer in charge of our days. We're no longer in charge of our worlds. Our schedules get out of hand. We don't know how to manage things on a day-to-day basis. We start believing that expectations with possible demands are happening all around us. We start to think maybe we're not being treated fairly anymore. We're being picked on. And those are signs that's that real or imagined. That would be more of the imagined piece typically, is that, I'm not being treated fairly, something's wrong, why am I being singled out? Then as it goes even worse, we potentially lose our job status, we get demoted, put on suspension, we lose some financial abilities in practice. And then there's a lack of just appreciation of contributions in general. That means, am I doing anything? Am I being effective anymore as a lawyer, as a person? And so these are signs that build upon each other and get to a point where if we don't catch them early, we're likely to have a meltdown. This is something that I've been working with attorneys now in this practice of Florida lawyers assistants since 2004. So I'm going on almost 16 years. And one of the things that makes attorneys different than other professions that I deal with is the continued adversarial nature of the practice of law. Even when there's contractual law as opposed to litigation, there's still an adversary. There's one side against the other, trying to get an advantage over the other side. And that creates tension by itself. This is the one thing that I've heard time and time again over the years, and for those of you who may be old enough to remember the Arid Extra Dry commercials where the tagline was, never, ever, ever let them see you sweat, okay? I've heard a number of attorneys tell me that opposing counsel and even judges are take advantage of me when I seem weak or I seem vulnerable. So there's a belief that we have to be perfect, we have to be on our game all the time, and the fear of being seen otherwise creates a huge amount of stress in attorneys sometimes. The competition, the field of law in Florida has been incredibly burdened by a large increase of licensed attorneys. I think to date there's over 105,000 licensed in the state, and it's not keeping, the demand for attorneys is not keeping up with the population, so there's an increased competition for clients throughout the state. And as a new attorney, You want to get settled. If you're not, have the luxury of working in a firm, maybe, starting your own practice. It's hard to find clients sometimes, and the pressure on getting clients, no matter what, the cost, it can become difficult. And that's sometimes I've heard the term door law, is when new attorneys will take anybody who knocks on their door or calls their phone or somehow reaches out to them, regardless of whether they have an expertise in the field that they're being asked to work with. And that can get someone in trouble, and a lot of our clients that refer to FLA are because they have gotten into an area of law that's just way over their heads, and they don't know what to do, and they freak out. The collegiality issue, dog eat dog, is another issue that's come up from time to time in your profession. Mine is no different, by the way. Psychologists and psychiatrists tend to battle each other for clients just as much. So as professionals, we have to understand that if we can somehow look at other professionals out there as colleagues and as a resource as opposed to competition, we can be less vulnerable to the stress that's out there for us. Sometimes cases go on forever and ever, and the satisfaction of winning, it doesn't happen in any time in the near future. That has the problem for some people who practice those particular kind of cases in law, and the inability to separate personal from professional life. And that's where I want to make sure you hold on to that point. We are individuals who chose certain professions to practice. It's our job. We worked hard, we studied hard. You got through your exams, you got through the board, you got through the bar exam, you've been offered a license to practice law in Florida. But remember that that is not your number one identity, and it ought not to be. I work with a number of attorneys who are seasoned professionals who've been practicing for years, and when they run up against some discipline problem with the bar and they're forced to take a step away for a period of time, vis-a-vis a short-term or long-term suspension, a lot of times their whole world falls apart because all they've ever known for the years they've been in the practice of law is how to be a lawyer. What else can I be? What else can I do? And I try to help them remember that you became an attorney, but before that you may have been a father, a son, a brother, a sister, a mother. You're an individual who chose this profession, and you have skills. You have the ability to do things and to think, critically, and give that person a chance to understand that just because you're not practicing now or for the foreseeable future doesn't mean your life is inevitably over. One of the things I want to let you know is that anytime you have a question throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to, type it in or somehow communicate that rather than waiting for the question and answer period at the end of the presentation. I'd much rather have this as interactive as possible, even though I can't see you and you can't see me. Some things we need to understand is that there's some kind of stress is both healthy and unhealthy, okay? And some people might question, well, what do you mean? And here we go, okay? Sometimes we need to be somewhat stressed to help us get through things, prepare for exams, prepare for a big case. So healthy stress actually helps us increase our attention and focus in a given moment, okay? It helps our energy and motivation level increase, okay? Sometimes it even helps creativity and productivity. Again, healthy stress is that I have something coming up, I know I have to deal with it, but I didn't put it off for 6 weeks and I had this major case. It's something that I've been working on, but as we get close to the day of reckoning or the day of trial or the day of presentation, our level of stress by definition increases, okay? And this may be surprising to some people, but it can create a condition for personal satisfaction, okay? Healthy stress does help us do all the things and get ready for performing at any given moment or over a period of a trial, but it does, it can be very, very satisfying. And again, healthy stress is time limited. In other words, it's in the moment, it's for the opportunity. It's not something that continues to eat at us and build up without any resolution or any endpoint. As compared to unhealthy stress, okay? Unhealthy stress leads to things like fatigue, a lessening of efficiency rather than an increase in productivity, okay? It does ultimately result in anxiety, burnout, and depression. Again, this is where the stress is not focused for a given task or an opportunity. It's something that is just underlying, it's simmering, and if we don't deal with it, it starts to boil a little bit, and then as it boils more, it gets harder and harder to cope with that. And I guess I have a question here. It says, does healthy stress vary depending on the person? Well, yes, it does, and I'll deal with that because we're all vulnerable at different levels to stress. And I'll cover in another slide or two, what are those predictors that may cause one person to succumb to stress either quicker or more deeply than someone else? Okay, that's a question that we'll handle in a second. Okay, and again, it's a physiological thing. I am a psychologist. I am not a medical doctor, but essentially, and you can read through this, your brain, there's a hormone process that goes on, and you've heard of adrenaline. Adrenaline is the hormone in our body that gets you keyed up. Okay, back in the day when I used to play sports, which was a long time ago, get me ready for a game, gets you ready for a test or an exam, for the bar exam, that sense of I'm on my game, I'm keyed up, that's the adrenaline. Our muscles get ready, our eyes dilate, and that's just a physiological response to that. And sometimes our heart beats faster, we get extra blood going, and again, all in a readiness mode. This is all readiness mode. But sometimes things go beyond that, okay? When we get past the point of readiness and we get to the point where stress is no longer being healthy, again, just to reiterate, is a reduction in personal and professional performance. Okay, we start lagging, we're not on our game anymore. We start missing things, we start not feeling well, health problems, mental and physical. And ultimately, people start looking for ways to start coping with the feeling that they're not on their game anymore. They feel some self-loathing, they feel real down, and some people turn to alcohol and other drugs to what we call self-medicate. Others start falling into a depression where they feel they can't, do anything anymore. Sometimes the depression is so debilitating that I've heard of people not being able to get up in the morning and get out of bed. They just don't want to move, they don't have the energy, and they don't have a desire to do anything other than to hide under their blanket and pillow. And back to the question that was asked, these are some of the risk factors that individually affect us and can impact how stress in a situation does differ from one person to another. A family history of genetics, okay? Some people, depression has been identified as something that is passed generationally, as is some other mental health issues that if you have a family history of someone who has been depressed, a shut-in, or someone who has some things, the strange Uncle Fred who was just different, and we kept him in the back room and didn't get out so much. Take a look at that and just know that you may be susceptible to stress at a different level than someone who didn't have something like that. The age of first use is when people start using alcohol, drinking, drugs to cope with some level of stress. One of the things that we've learned over the years, and this will come as no surprise, I hope, to anybody, is that people use drugs and drink alcohol because it works at taking away whatever present pain or discomfort one is feeling. Okay, if they didn't work, they wouldn't be used. But it turns out that when we start, feeling stress as perhaps a young teenager, or even a child, and we find something that just takes that feeling away momentarily, we say, that's something that I can use whenever I feel like this. So the earlier that we find people turning to drugs and alcohol, the worse the outcome and the outlook for that person can potentially be. Again, this is without any help. Culture plays a role. Gender plays a role. Anyone who's had a history of physical, sexual, emotional abuse. All those factors play into an individual's, susceptibility to stress and how we deal with it. The idea of healthy stress, again, if you have less of this, then you're more likely to cope better and to utilize that as a motivating factor as opposed to something that would debilitate us. Issue of chronic stress, again, if you don't deal with it, it's not going to go away by itself. History of mental illness, physical illness, people who have long-term chronic illnesses and whatnot, they start feeling, that they aren't able to perform the way they used to, and as a result, that stress leading to burnout, leading to withdrawal from their world happens. And again, chronic unresolved emotions, shame and fear. We're in a world now, and there's a movement in the bar talking about this destigmatization of mental illness. Unfortunately, it's still around. I've been practicing psychology since the early 90s and have always been on a mission of trying to normalize the human experience. Unfortunately, we still deal with people who are very afraid of admitting that they're not okay. So the shame and fear factor, keeping it quiet, keeping it close to the vest, can really be a very undermining approach to dealing with stress. And we know that over the last few years, we've had some very, very prominent individuals in the community take their lives through suicide. And there's a lot of shame that goes along with, when someone gets to that point, they're not really sharing their pain out loud, and they've come to realize or believe that there's no alternative but to end their life. And that's really the gist of destigmatization is we're all human beings. We all experience the ups and downs of life and the challenges of failure and whatnot. And if we can just recognize that being human doesn't mean striving for perfection, and when we have a setback doesn't mean it's the end of our world. And if we have multiple setbacks, doesn't mean that it's going to continue that way forever. So that shame and fear factor, I think, plays very heavy, especially in the professions like law, like medicine, nursing, because we have been trained to succeed, we've been trained to achieve, we've been trained to help others, and somehow we've lost or never learned the ability of how to help ourselves in the process. And if any of you have had this experience or know somebody who's had this, this is just one way of saying, hey, it's not okay. I'm not feeling well. But this is not what we're going to say out loud. This is what we're going to say in our heads. I hate my job. We'll make up excuses. Okay, but this is a little, hopefully you smiled when you saw this, because wouldn't it be great to pick up the phone and say, hey, I am going to be late today because I really don't like what I'm doing at work. But that probably never happened in real life.
Dr. Weinstein, can you just, so I think I hear a lot about, what we consider maybe the extreme situations, but, where somebody's to the point of, of depression or, where maybe classified as a mental illness. But, are these techniques or is this stress issue really something, for those of us who are kind of living our daily lives, we might not feel overwhelmed or burned out, but can we use, how can we use them even when, just in regular life where we're not really quite at the full stress level, it's just, day-to-day kind of healthy stress? Okay,
so we're not at code red stress level is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's becoming aware of how we're feeling and how we've changed, okay? Stress, again, healthy stress is motivating, okay? But if we get to the point where it becomes demotivating, then we start looking at that. Doesn't mean that you're at the end of your rope when you have, chronic stress. It could be the beginning of that process. So, again, I'm going to show you some ways of how to deal with stress and manage your stress as we go along. In fact, here's one of them on the next slide. that will show you or explain to you some ways of taking those interim steps so it doesn't become tragic or chronic or really, really desperate. But again, to be aware that something's not going right and this is a way that I can back down from that. So one of the ways of doing it is we call the 6 R's of stress management: responsibility, reflection, relaxation, relationships, refueling, and recreation. Okay. Sometimes when we start feeling stressed, we feel out of control. So one of the things to remember is that you are in control typically, and you can look at this and break it down to workable parts rather than trying to take on an entire overwhelming issue at one time or number of issues together at one time. Okay. Knowing your stress triggers. Okay. Knowing yourself, knowing what pushes your buttons. Okay. And this happens inside and outside of work. Somebody shared with me today that she's a new parent, and sometimes being a new parent raises or lowers our threshold for stress tolerance. Okay, sleep deprivation, responsibility of a new person, and that person's existence is entirely, depending on how well you do as a parent. But if you're aware that those could be possible triggers for you to kind of react in a way that would be not necessarily positive or helpful, then you can start being aware when it does get to that point. Look at what happens when you get stressed. Some people get stressed and they become physically ill. Some people get emotionally ill. Some people get very tense. Their muscles tense up. Some people just kind of become blah and kind of feel like they become a puddle of melted butter when they're stressed. So those are the things that we need to look at in ourselves. And again, work-life balance is important. Okay, how much am I dedicating to my personal life, to my own individual sense of well-being, and to my career or my job? Okay, doing things like relaxation. There's a number of techniques that people use. Some people yoga is a new founded thing again. It's been around for hundreds and thousands of years, if I'm not mistaken. But people are starting to find the benefits of yoga, of exercise. And the one that I always throw out there as a challenge to all our professionals is putting your phone down, your cell phone. We have become enslaved to our cell phones. And every time I go in a presentation, I kind of throw this out as, has anyone tried this? And typically I say, are you kidding me? I get the response of, there's no way we can put our phone down, because even if we shut it off for like a half hour, there's going to be 200 text messages when I turn my phone back on, which is even more stressful. Okay, and part of it is that we've trained our clients to know that we're going to respond at a moment's notice, and the expectation is being met because that's what we think we have to do. In fact, sometimes our firms and our partners tell us we have to do that, but there was a world before cell phones. I don't know if any of you ever know that, but before there were cell phones, there were things like payphones and message machines that you had to go home and push a button or even call remotely. But it wasn't an immediate response world that we lived in back in the day. Unfortunately, with the advent of these wonderful, electronic devices that have proved to be very, very useful, they also come with a cost sometimes with people. So, as I put here, I know it's a big ask, but sometimes, even on the weekends, just try for 15 minutes, shut your phone off, do something different, and go back to it and turn it back on. And then you'll see that it's not the end of the world, that even if someone does text you in that 15 minutes, you'll get to that person and you'll get to the issue. But you'll start to understand that you're not, being controlled by the electronics in your world as much as maybe you have been. Maintaining healthy relationships both inside and outside of work. Okay? A lot of times I ask people, when they call, they say, I'm stressed, I'm not sure I'm set, fit to practice law anymore, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. One of my first questions is, who's around? Who's there to help you? Do you have anyone who supports you? Or attorney will call and say, I just got suspended, and my wife is threatening, or my husband is threatening to leave me because they were depending on my income, and now I'm no longer able to provide that. So understanding that relationships in our lives can be helpful, but they also can be very negative. So I do a lot of, trying to help people differentiate between positive and negative relationships and people in their lives, and trying to minimize those negative relationships and increase the positive ones. Refueling, just kind of taking a break and taking even a breather. Taking a walk around the office if you can't even get out of the office. Sometimes just putting everything down, sitting back in your chair, closing your eyes and breathing, in through your nose and out through your mouth for a few seconds, just to kind of regroup and regenerate. It goes a long way. And again, recreation. I know that might be, a far cry for some of you, but laughing and having fun is vital to being human. Okay, and if you can find time to do that, and I think there was someone who said if you laugh like 23 times a day, you're going to live an extra year or two, whatever. If you can laugh 223 times, even better. Laughter and joy in our lives, something goes away when we're under pressure and we're working our practices and doing our jobs and having to come home and meet the demands of home life as well. Again, stress management techniques. Sometimes it helps to get organized. I know people who would say otherwise, but organization does decrease one's level of stress sometimes. Having a to-do list or a to-don't list even. And I say that because there are some things that we have to prioritize and things that we can't do everything. So if we can figure out what we want to do and what we need to do versus what we're expected to, we have to do is a different thing. And again, this is an old name for, I think, fuel. Is the new term, the new division in the bar. Legal fuel is one that helps with helping you with your practice of law. If you're independent practitioners, they are very helpful in helping you set up your practice so it becomes more efficient and hopefully reducing your level of stress. At home, we talked about just having fun. Date nights, having time with your children if you have any, your dog, your pet, whatever it may be, just to have an opportunity to step away from the day-to-day routine. Taking care of yourself, exercising, getting checked out by physicians every once in a while. Examining your use of substances is an interesting way of saying, hey, am I doing too much? Am I relying on the drink at night, every night when I come home or two, and if that's the case, then maybe we should take a look at what's going on. And the one on the bottom, which is the one I live by all the time, is please don't take yourselves so seriously, okay? I was told a long time ago that I am not so important, and I took offense to that initially until I realized that what the person was telling me is that I am a person that can do what I can do to the best of my ability, but sometimes I'm just not going to measure up to someone's expectations. And that doesn't mean I'm less than, or doesn't mean that I've failed. It just means that there was a mismatch between what someone's expectations were and my performance. And sometimes it was my own expectations that I had to look at and change. Again, looking at the workplace, okay, educate support staff, the people who are there to help you. Let them know how they can better help you. Let them know that there's a way that they can, help you put together some projects in a different way that would be less stressful, and then you work a relationship out with that support staff rather than saying, you're not doing your job. I'm really going to report you. This is not working out. See what you can do to develop and enhance the relationship with your assistants rather than to come down on them. This is something that firms are doing more and more, is providing non-threatening reporting options, which means that somebody in the office says I'm concerned about X, Y associate. They look like they're struggling, or they haven't been around for a while. I'm concerned about them. Rather than coming down on a negative way, the firm will sometimes reach out and say, hey, we hear some things. What can we do to help you out? Giving family members, a contact, just to let people know who might be around in case the firm needs to reach out, or you need to reach out to someone out there. And again, this is redundant, but again, I want to make sure that you understand there are ways to deal with stress. Stress doesn't have to take us down. It doesn't have to beat us. So for always, on our game, so to speak, with stress management, rather than being on our game for our performance at work, we'll likely be much more successful at our jobs. And again, just to reiterate the idea of I am what I do. Okay, this is a trap that a lot of us go say and fall into, is that if I'm not practicing, what do I do? If I'm not a lawyer, what is my life? If I can't do what I'm doing, where am I and who am I? And again, look at yourself and find out and understand that you're more than just what your profession tells you and what you're licensed at. And here is the piece of the presentation where I think is going to be somewhat challenging, but I had fun with it. And what I want you to understand is my conceptualization of being humble. Okay, humility is, to me, the key to breaking stress. If I can sit back in my day and laugh at myself for a mistake I've made, or laugh at a situation, and be okay with that, then I can get by. If I constantly berate myself for every little mistake, then I am not practicing what I believe is humility. Okay, so this is from the Huffington Post, and I kind of took a look at this and said this is an apropos presentation of what I believe lawyers go through and other professionals. In this case, something that I think might hit home for all of you. So it starts out with the crust, and the crust is how I see it, is what others see, what we put out there, what we allow others to see about us. Okay, so yeah, we want to project confidence. We want to show them that, hey, we're an expert. We got your case. We can handle this. And sometimes we come across as a know-it-all. Any question, I got an answer. Don't worry about it. I can solve all your problems. And that's what we present. That's our outer shell, our crust of what we show our clients. Then we have what's really inside of us. Okay, and it's called the filling, and some of it lends itself towards other areas of professions, but I wanted you to take a look at some of the things that happen, challenges about the computer system crashing, and all of a sudden you lost a client file. Okay, forgetting something, dare I say that. Okay, sometimes we do forget, and we don't want to let the client know we forgot, but we struggle with that. Not showing up on time, and even breaking promises. Okay, so we do that, and we sprinkle it with a dash of bad luck and stir well, and it gets deeper. Okay, in a separate bowl where we have someone's unhappy. The client is complaining that we're not doing our job, that we're not being responsive enough. We're worried about something where one of our peers kind of says, "What are you doing? How are you handling this case? What are you thinking?" Or one of our supervisors might say that. Okay, and it goes on, and then screwing up, and this is the stuff that we keep inside. This is the part that we don't show the public. We struggle with all the time, but this is the part of the humble pie that we need to realize happens to all of us. All these things can happen at any given time. It doesn't mean that we're failures, but it does mean that it's to be aware of, and we don't have to always be perfect to be successful in our profession. So you mix these two together, add secret ingredient, which is nowadays losing a friend over a social media dispute. Okay, and that seems to really put everything in perspective. Social media has become a very, very poignant part of our lives and very important. Some people depend on it too much, but as the younger attorneys I've come across are much more aware of the impact of social media, and sometimes it gets too much. People take that their life is out there, and it can become a problem for a lot of people to be something. So now we put this is our topping. And a spoonful of realization, showing a grace and a sprinkle on top. So this is where we start to come out of this whole thing. Okay, so yeah, I messed up. I did make a mistake. I'll own it, and you know what? I'll do my best to overcome it. And this can be a grave mistake, or it can be a little one. Okay, and we let it sit overnight. We don't go out and do a sky is falling kind of thing. We bake for 60 minutes or longer. okay? And we take a look at this and say, okay, this is how we have to live our lives. We're going to make mistakes. We are human. We are imperfect beings. And as long as we can understand that this humble pie is something that we are going to be part of and part of us forever, we'll be okay, and we'll get through what we have to get through.
Dr.
And
Weinstein,
this is a warning. Yes?
For the, so you mentioned the professionalism trap, and so, kind of going through this recipe, how does the professionalism trap really cause additional stress given these things that that happen to you in our daily life practicing as lawyers?
Well, again, as we go, as you look at it, and if we look at defining ourselves as our profession and as our title or as our job, then we lose the humanity that is part of being a lawyer or a part of being any profession. But in this case, life does happen, and as we go back and look at the feeling, okay, this can happen to any of us at any time. And if we are stuck with the idea that I am a lawyer and all I do is that, and I have to be perfect all the time as a lawyer, then when something like this comes up, the feeling becomes toxic for us, okay, as opposed to something that we can be aware of and overcome. If it becomes too toxic, it takes us down. So I don't know if any of you bake or do any kind of cooking. I happen to love baking myself. There's been times when it's been a disaster in the oven. Okay, what comes out is not what I thought was, when I put it in. But if we can go past that and know that it happens. So being humble helps us get through and overcome that potential trap of professionalism. Okay, and then this is something that I came across. This was an article or a paper that was written about doctors and how doctors have to learn to be humble and practice humility in the practice of medicine. And I thought this was very apropos to the practice of law because, again, lawyers, like doctors, are trained to help. We're trained to be problem solvers. And sometimes that role becomes one that we become dictatorial to our clients as opposed to developing a relationship with our clients. And if we can realize that being a client is a very vulnerable place to be. Clients come to us and they ask for our help and they trust that we're going to take care of them. But if we don't like how they're acting, if we don't like the questions they're asking, sometimes I've heard attorneys snap at their clients and say, that's not okay. I'm not going to answer that question. That's a ridiculous question to ask me, or the demands you're putting on me are just not okay. If we set up the relationship from the beginning, letting the client know that we appreciate how difficult your situation is, we understand that you're going through a tough time and you've asked me to help you, then we start to begin the relationship on the right foot. So that starts out with this idea of being humble. If we promise a client the world, chances are they're going to be disappointed and we're going to wind up with a potential bar complaint. Okay? The idea is that I'll do the best I can. I understand your situation. I will do everything I can to help you out. I can't promise you the outcome you want, but I'll do everything I can to get it. Okay? And that's a good start to any relationship, and especially one when you have a client who's coming to you in their darkest or most vulnerable moment of need. Okay? So we develop that relationship, and we understand that it's a give and take. It's a two-way relationship. Yes, you have the expertise to take care of the situation. That's why the client hired you, and that's why you took on the case. But understanding that their personality issues are going to come into play, as well as your own personality issues, and being aware that sometimes that clash can become very difficult to work through. Okay, we move on to more pieces of that humility in law. And we talk about hubris and not being arrogant. Okay, sometimes I find attorneys come to me and they're arrogant. They're really angry by the process. They've been singled out by the bar. The clients treated them unfairly. They created a complaint, and all I did was try to do my best, but they didn't accept that. And here I am, and I'm I'm in front of the bar and in front of a referee, and I don't know what to do. And again, if we can look back at the fact pattern of this particular cases, often find that the individual has failed to maintain that relationship, has failed to maintain that that even though they're an expert doesn't mean they can't be told things aren't going right. I know when a client tells me they're not happy with what happens in a session, I used to fall apart and say, what did I do wrong? Oh my God, I'm a terrible psychologist. I should maybe try to do something different. Maybe I'll become a landscape gardener or something. But sometimes we miss. Sometimes we don't hear what a client's saying, either because we have a preconceived notion of how things should go, or we just misheard what they said. And it's okay to say, you know what, let's back up a little bit. Let's regroup and let's look at this differently. And apparently I didn't help you the way you thought. What can we do differently going forward? Okay, and that's another piece of this humility that is so important, and it's so hard to reach. It took me a long time. I'm not saying I did this from day one coming out of graduate school, because my own sense of insecurity, my own sense of, am I doing a good enough job? Am I going to be a good psychologist? And I'm sure a lot of you ask that question of yourselves. I'm new. Am I going to be a good attorney? Am I doing the right thing? Am I helping these people? Is this the right profession for me? So our own sense of insecurity plays a role in how willing we are to be humble and accept the humility. And with that note, I think I've come to the end of the presentation. Just some important things about Florida Lawyers Assistance for those of you who don't know. And I don't know how I just went back, but we'll try it this way. We've been around for a while. We started out with one attorney who was in recovery, literally driving around the state of Florida and trying to find and help others. Let me see where we're at. Okay. Having the technical difficulties on my end. I'm sorry about that. We're a nonprofit corporation. We are not part of the Florida Bar, which is very important for everybody to know. Even though we work with the bar, and the bar does fund a lot of our operation here, we are not part of the bar, okay? So we enjoy a separate and confidential relationship between attorneys who contact us and the bar. So if you are feeling any of these feelings and don't know how to manage and feeling too stressed and are worrying about being burnt out, you can call FLA at any day, and we have a 24-hour hotline available that answered by myself and a couple of other colleagues in the office. We are not obligated to report that you contacted us to the Florida Bar. In fact, we're prevented from doing that. So one of the things that I like about what we do here is that we do have that confidentiality and that protection from being reported. Whereas if I'm a psychologist and I have a problem, I can reach out to an organization that's similar, but I am more automatically on the radar with my board. That's not the case with FLA. So you can call us before the bar reports you to us for a grievance of sorts, which makes it a lot easier and a lot more approachable. We have a network of professionals around the state that we can refer you to. We have support groups in the major population areas around the state that are very helpful and very, very supportive to individuals who are dealing with these issues. And it could be the whole gamut of mental health and or substance abuse issues combined. We find that these groups are very, very supportive, very nurturing, very safe, and 100% confidential. So we've been around for a while. We do have a crisis hotline that you can call at any given time, and whether or not you wake up in the middle of the night and you say, my heart's pounding, I don't know what to do, I can't get this case out of my head, whatever, we'll be there to listen and hopefully either say goodnight and have a good after the conversation, and you can feel that you've reached out, or we can put you in touch with some professionals around the state who can further continue to support you. And that's our mission. Our mission is to help the legal profession. We help lawyers, judges, and we help law students. Some of you may have heard of us before today's presentation. Those of you who are new to what FLA is, hopefully this gives you a little idea of what we're able to do and how we can help. So I know we're getting close to the end. Are there any questions at this point? Because my presentation has come to an end.
Dr. Weinstein, so I think that the Florida Lawyers Assistance Program is a great option for lawyers and really offers us services, as you said, just to kind of reach out and make a call if we think that something's worrying us, or if we think, or if there's something even more severe. But what if a lawyer is not, doesn't think or thinks that taking Florida Lawyers Assistance may be a big step for them to take? Do you have any other recommendations for places or things that they could reach out to, whether it be a psychologist or maybe a group or, any other kind of settings that a lawyer could reach out to that might not be specific to lawyers that may help them with managing stress or any other issues they may have?
Well, sure. I mean, there's always the local mental health associations. Most people nowadays have some kind of insurance or some kind of mental health network that they can reach out to. One of the things that calling and reaching out to Florida Lawyers Assistance is probably one of the most benign steps to take, because we are not going to, again, report somebody or damage anyone's reputation. We're here to be a resource to maybe connect them with a support system in their communities. We have some people call us that have a lot of alcohol or drug problems. We have a series of volunteer attorneys who have work with us around the state. We can put you in touch with one of them for support, who can maybe take you to a meeting and or just listen to you from a perspective of someone whose life has been challenged by substances or alcohol. But calling us is really a very, very benign step to take in terms of opening up options for that person who is in need, or might even not realize that they're in need, but say, hey, you know what? I've been thinking this. Does this make sense? And is there something that somewhere I can go to process that kind of those questions in my mind, so I don't have to lose sleep or it gets worse.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Weinstein, for your presentation today. It has been a wealth of knowledge that we've gotten in less than an hour, and I hope that this is helpful for our young lawyers and others who may be listening in today. The CLE number for this program is 3783, and it's approved for 1 general CLE credit and 1 mental health credit. If you know anyone who wanted to attend the webinar today and was not able to, please let them know that they will be archived on the Florida Bar YLD website, so you can look for it there. And this and other mental health or other stigma-free YLD programming that we've produced. And stay tuned for more health and wellness webinars that we'll be producing in the spring of 2020. Thank you to everyone for attending the webinar, and we'll look forward to reaching out to hearing from you later. Please feel free to reach out to me and Nika Ashton on the Florida Bar Young Lawyers Division Board of Governors if you have any questions about Dr. Weinstein's program or reaching out to Dr. Weinstein himself. Thanks, and have a good one, everybody.